Alright, so I'm going to go over my own healer build that I use in New World. So to start things off, I want to say there are many different builds to use as healer. Um, Pretty much every ability for the life staff can be useful except for Light's Embrace. This one used to be really OP, but now it's really just not good at all. So apart from that, every other ability here can be used in a build successfully. But I'm going to go over my own build, and I'm going to go over the pros and cons of it, and also at the end, or I guess the second part of this video, I'll be more so talking about how to actually play healer, like how to approach what abilities you want to use first, and just a general flowchart to use as healer for this build. So before we get into that though, let's first talk about the pros and cons of this build. So the biggest thing with this, the biggest pro, is that you have a lot of healing output. So your potential healing output with this build is very high. And that's thanks to the single target healing from Divine Embrace. And then you have 2 AoE heals with Sacred Ground and Orb of Protection. So these two are really going to be your, you're going to put this on the tank, you're going to put this on the tank and then DPS, and then any stragglers, archers or ranged players who might need some health, you're going to use Divine Embrace. And that's typically what you want to go for, and this can offer a ton of healing output, so that's a big deal. Another big pro is you're able to cover a lot of area with the heals, and I was talking about that before. So you have AoEs from Sacred Ground and Orb of Protection, but you also have single target healing. So you can cover a ton of area if you're able to use Divine Embrace successfully. And that's really what this build comes down to, is being able to recognize when to use Divine Embrace and then using it basically immediately when someone needs health. So that's the kind of backbone of this build is Divine Embrace. But of course, with Sacred Ground and Orb of Protection, you can kind of just spam Orb of Protection, and that makes it a lot easier. So the last pro of this build is that you can give a lot of Fortify. So you have Fortify from both Orb of Protection, which gives 10% Fortify, and then you also have Fortify from Sacred Ground, thanks to the Fortifying Sacred Ground perk, which I'll cover once we get to those perks. So now let's go over the cons. Firstly, it's hard to play. This build is not really beginner friendly. So if you want to get into this build, I still think you want to try it. Like, it is a kind of harder healer build to play, but realistically, once you kind of get the mechanics down and you get a feel for the flow of it, it becomes a lot easier, and it's just a lot more streamlined once you understand what to do and what buttons to press in situations. But yeah, it is a difficult build to play as opposed to, let's say, Beacon and Splash of Light, which you just, you pop a beacon on the tank or a DPS and you don't really need to think about it. And then Splash of Light is even easier. You just press it whenever it's available and it's going to heal pretty much everyone. So it's a very easy one to use. Another con of this is you have to be reasonably aware of your surroundings, and I guess this applies to every healer build, but specifically for this one too, you will need to be cautious of any stragglers because you don't have the greatest AoE heals, no Splash of Light or Beacon. So if there is a straggler like an archer who needs healing, you're going to have to know when that person needs health. So that's where Divine Embrace comes in. And then the last con is you don't have a get out of jail free card for removing debuffs. So with Splash of Light, and this is why Splash of Light is so good, is it removes a debuff. And the reason this is so good is in mutations, if for example someone gets rooted, like with a current mutation with Tempest, there's the green circle that goes around on the floor. and if it sticks onto someone, it'll root them, and it'll start putting a tick damage on them. And that can do a ton of damage, so it's really nice to be able to remove that debuff. However, there is still an option to remove debuffs with heavy attacks, but you just have to, again, be situationally aware and when to use this. Alright, now let's go over the Void Gauntlet. So for my Void Gauntlet build, I use Orb of Decay, Oblivion, and of course Void Blade, like I mentioned before. This build isn't necessarily focused on Void Blade. The main priority as a healer is to utilize Oblivion, and Oblivion is a super strong ability. It will give stamina to anyone who's inside of it, and it will also give empower to anyone who's inside of it, which is just a so strong move. I mean, it's just a very useful move to use, and this is why Void Blade is strong, because what you can do is put refreshing move on your Void Gauntlet, and then use Void Blade to just get that cooldown lowered, and then pop another Oblivion. So it's just kind of a cycle of Void Blade, Oblivion, Void Blade, Oblivion, and you're going to be mixing in Orb of Decays, and I'll go over that in the second part of this video when I actually talk about the strategy involved in using this build and just how to approach and all of that stuff. So when we get to that, I will cover it, but for now, the main thing to think about is utilizing Oblivion and putting it in a place where the tank can get stamina and the DPS can also get that damage increase. Other than that, there isn't really too much here. Of course, you can copy verbatim my build, but feel free to experiment. You know, I haven't really gone in the depths of things for ironing out this build just yet, so there is some room for improvement, I'm sure, but if you find this build useful, by all means try it out. Alright, next let's go over the attributes. So when I use this build, I use 100 con, 365 focus, and 50 int. Now, there is a case to be said about using 5 int instead of 50 and just going all in focus. And there's also a case to be made for using even 100 or even 150 int. Now, I wouldn't go as far as 150 int for mutations. I'd probably stick to 50 at most for mutations, just because you're going to want to have as much healing power as possible when running mutations, especially M10s. So that's the one takeaway there. But, you know, anywhere between 50 to 150 int if you want to be a little bit more DPS centric, because I will cover how this build kind of is strong when it comes to Void Blade, and that's another key thing, but I'll get into that later. But yeah, 50 int to 150 int is a reasonable place unless you're running mutations. Then probably a little less. Alright, on to weapons and armor, perks, and etc., all that stuff. So let's start with the life staff. So I use the Will of the Ancients life staff. It's good. I think there might be a better life staff out there than this one. I can't remember the name of it, but I do like the Will of the Ancients because you have refreshing move, refreshing, and blessed, which is just all around kind of the best 3 perks you can ask for. Of course, there's no weapon perk on it, so it won't be good for, like, you know, for example, if you had Fortifying Sacred Ground on the life staff, it would be slightly more beneficial because you get that extra fortify, but still it's still a good life staff. And I do run this build in mutations as well, just to mention that, and it is completely viable, so there's nothing really wrong with that. For the gems, so you can put just a diamond on this. You will get 15% damage and outgoing healing. I prefer using the energized rune glass, and this is because you will get 4 stamina on each hit with the life staff, and then if you pair that with the rune glass on the armor, it'll add up to, let's see, this is just 1 stamina, yeah. So it'll be 9 stamina for each hit with the life staff, which is pretty good. I mean, it's a 3-second cooldown, but you get 9 stamina on each hit with life staff. It's just, I like it. There's of course different ways to utilize this build. I'm sure there's like a leeching build out there you can do, but I do like this stamina build that I have here, so I can vouch for it. So for the Void Gauntlet, I'm using Blessed, Corrupted Bane, and Refreshing Move. I like Corrupted Bane because sometimes it's good to get a little bit more damage in. It's especially nice if you're not running a mutation and you're just doing a regular dungeon or just like, open world stuff. You can put in a little bit more damage and it just helps overall. But of course, the big one is Blessed and Refreshing Move. Refreshing Move being just very, very strong with this build. Like I was saying before, you can lower those cooldowns and get Oblivion up as soon as possible by just using Void Blade. And with Refreshing Move, it just comes very, very quick. So that's the 2 weapons there. Oh, and then I have a Sapphire equipped on this just for a little bit more damage. And yeah. So for the armor, obviously Corrupted Ward on everything. I should go without saying by now that Corrupted Ward, when you're running mutations and just in general, you're going to want a ward set for every mob type. If you can't afford it, then, just kind of get a feel for the build, and then once you have enough money, either craft it or buy it from the trade post. But you definitely do want to try to focus on getting ward gear for every type of mob type and for every build you have. So let's first talk about the helmet here. So we're using accelerated Light's Embrace, and whoa, hold on. Did I mess up? I don't use Light's Embrace. Oh, okay. I'll be right back. Alright, so like I was saying, I use Refreshing Divine Embrace on the helmet with Corrupted Ward, and Refreshing Divine Embrace will lower the cooldown by 41% if you use it on a target with less than 50% health, which is really useful, and I definitely was using this before. Alright, so onto the chestplate. Nullifying Oblivion, obviously just so strong. It will remove debuffs on enemies, so if you put it down, I know a situation for like Genesis, where you have those enemies that kind of charge up when they're about like 60% health or something, and you can remove that debuff and then instantly, you can just kill them. So this is very good for enemies that tend to heal. I know priests heal too, so this is still useful in like Tempest and stuff. And yeah, it's just overall a good one. And then of course we have Ferocious Blade. This will allow you to heal while below 50% health. So it's just a really good sustain. Not as good as Flurry from the Rapier, but still actually pretty useful. And then we have Mending Protection, which will increase healing power by 24% if you use it on an ally with less than 50% health. And then finally we have Fortifying Sacred Ground, which is probably the top priority. So if you were making a build, you definitely want to try to get Fortifying Sacred Ground first, because it's one of the stronger perks for the life staff. Next one I would say would be Nullifying Oblivion or Ferocious Blade if you're using this build. Mending Protection, although actually, all of these perks are really useful in their own regard. So, just get every perk basically. And like I said, if you can't craft it or buy it yet, just get a bare bones build going. Run some regular Tempest, run some regular Genesis, whatever dungeon you want to do, or even just do open world content, and just get a feel for the build. And if you like it, you like it, and then you can make your own build about it. Or if you don't like it, use a different build. So, all right, on to jewelry. So with jewelry, I've kind of been mixing around a few things. I want to show you what I was using before, so I can kind of get a rough idea for this. Let's see, where did I put this actually? I think it's this. Yeah, this, and then I think this one too. Yeah. All right, so currently I use Alacrity, Divine, and Health. I think Alacrity was more viable when I was using the Beacon, because I was applying haste here. I don't know if anything applies haste. Anyways, you don't really need Alacrity, but it was decent enough for me to use, so I decided to use it. You definitely want to get Health. Divine is good. It's not required, but I think the main thing you want to focus on is Health. Let's see, what was I using? Oh, I didn't actually change that one out. So onto the ring now. I really like Hardy. Like, for pretty much every build that I make nowadays, I have Hardy on it. Just because the value of having Hardy is very, very strong. Especially if you like to dodge a lot, which realistically you should be dodging to avoid attacks anyways. So Hardy is just all around just a go-to good perk to have. And then, of course, Sacred. I mean, you cannot be a healer without having Sacred on your ring. So make sure that if you're running healer, you have Sacred on your ring, because having that 8.7% outgoing healing is going to make a big difference. And then I also have Leeching, just because sometimes in certain mutations you'll take tick damage, and you can just kind of self-heal that small damage by just using a basic attack. So that's a useful one too. And then for the earring, I'm using Refreshing Toast, Nimble, and Purifying Toast. And you'll see again I'm using Nimble, which is stamina regen. And for pretty much all of my builds, I value stamina quite a bit. Like, stamina is a very, very important thing to utilize. So that's why I prefer running jewelry with those stamina regen perks. So like Nimble, and then the extra stamina from Hardy. And then Purifying Toast, like I said. So I think Purifying Toast is very, very strong. You should definitely get that, because in mutations, if you're rooted from like that green circle thing, then you could just drink a regen pot and you'll be out of there. So definitely one to pick up there. So yeah, this earring is pretty much the best you can get, in my opinion, for this build. Alright, so now let's go over the heart rune. So for my rapier build, I use the Grasping Vines, and honestly, for healer, I think Grasping Vines is perfect as well. You can use Stone Form too if you're maybe a little bit more cautious of your tank losing aggro, for example, and you want to be able to have some extra fortify if that happens. But the utility from Brutal Heart Rune of Grasping Vines is so OP. Like, obviously you're going to root all the enemies around you, and then apply Rend and Weaken. So basically when your tank gets a group of mobs close together, and let's say you have a Great Axe player and they throw a Grav Well down, then basically if you just pop these vines down, it'll root everything, apply Weaken and Rend instantly, and then boom, you just go gas everything, everyone kills the mobs, and it just speeds up the process of going through those big mob clumps. So I really like using this. There isn't really a requirement to use this. Basically, like, as I was saying, you can use Stone Form, but those two I would probably just say are the two viable ones. Um, the other three, I think there's three. Yeah, they're not really as useful. Like detonate, obviously you're not a DPS, so you're not gonna really get value from that. And then dark ascent, it's just not that great. And of course, cannon blast and bile bomb, not as viable either. So pick either stone form or grasping vines as your heart rune. Alright, next let's talk about food. So, of course, attribute food, always want to use that. I use the smoked rib cap with cabbage and barley soup. This will increase calm by 24 and focus by 16. There are different ones you can use, for example, like the pure con or the pure focus ones, but this is the cheapest one on my server, so this is what I use. What else here? Oh yeah, hearty meals. So whenever you run a dungeon, you're going to want to use the energizing hearty meal. Most people know this, but there's actually someone from the company I just joined that actually didn't know this, and he's a new healer. So you definitely want to be using these whenever you're a healer. It will increase mana regen, so just no reason not to use this, basically. Now, you can use coatings too. They're not as important. Obviously, as a DPS, you always want to use coatings. But as a healer, you don't really need to use coatings, but you can use them. Like for me, I always use it as a healer as well. But just because I like using Void Blade, especially in like non-mutated, I always put a corrupted coating on my Void Gauntlet, so I can do a little bit more damage. But you don't really need to use it. So, and then of course mana pots. So I like to put this in my third slot. Doesn't matter where you put it, but just as long as it's in your hotbar of potions, so that whenever you need mana, you can just press that button and get mana. You should pretty much always be using those potions whenever you need mana. So if you're like at 10 mana, just use a potion, and then typically what I like to do is get some heals down before, and then pop the mana potions so that the DPS and tank can sustain for a little bit. Alright, now let's go over the keybinds and all of that stuff. So here is my settings for the healer. This is what I use. I know you can do separate keybinds for each player in the group. Now, I don't use that. There is definitely a reason to use that, though. The reason I don't use it is because I've gotten pretty good at being situationally aware, where I can just like look at who I want to heal and then pop a Divine Embrace. So like, you find who you want to heal and then heal them. It's kind of hard to explain, so I'll probably put a video on the screen right now of me doing that and showing the viability of it. But of course, I still think that if you're a new healer, you should get used to that muscle memory of the keybinds. So let's see, I actually don't even know where it is, key bindings. It should be, where is it? Healer, here it is, life staff. So you can bind these to a certain key, and then whoever you want to heal in the group, you just press that key. So I don't use it, like I said, but if you're struggling to scroll through the players on that list, then you should use it. Alright, now I want to cover 2 quick tips in regard to button pressing for healer. There's one thing that apparently isn't well known, so I'll go over both of them now, but we'll get into the main strategy of the build after this. So to start, you can press left control to heal yourself. So let's say you want to put a sacred ground on yourself, then you hold left control and press the button, and then boom, you have a sacred ground. You can also do this with Divine Embrace, so if you need some health, hold control, press the button, and you'll heal yourself. Really useful, just to know. You might not always be needing to self-heal. A lot of the times I'll just use a regen potion or a health potion and then keep the heals on everyone else. But sometimes if my potions are on cooldown and I really, really need to heal, then yes, I will use the Divine Embrace onto myself. The second thing is you can unlock where you're putting a Sacred Ground. So you'll see it's locked over there, and if I press middle mouse, it will unlock itself and you can move it around. Now this is very useful if you're trying to kind of encourage the tank and DPS to move to a certain situation, certain position. So it's also good if you're engaging in a fight first. You can put a Sacred Ground where you want everyone to go, and it just keeps it keeps your capabilities open instead of forcing yourself to put it on a player who isn't in the perfect position, for example. So just one thing to know there. Alright, so to start things off, let's first cover the basic attacks with the Life Staff, and then we'll go into the Void Gauntlet. So I'm assuming everybody already knows you have a light attack, you have a heavy attack, you have a dodge, you have a block, and then you have all your abilities. You have potions. Yeah, so there is a lot at your disposal, and it's a matter of how you use these in order to keep alive and keep your team alive. So let's start by covering the Void Gauntlet. I don't want to go too far in depth on the Life Staff until a little later. So with Void Gauntlet, as I mentioned before, Oblivion is a very strong move, so I recommend just kind of going to an open area and just kind of messing around with these abilities. So here's what I want to go into now though. With Orb of Decay on the Void Gauntlet, there's a separate ability perk called Detonating Orb, and it allows you to press the ability key again to detonate the orb, and it will either do damage if it's going out. So you'll see it's purple when it goes out and it's green when it comes back. Purple is going to do damage and green is going to give health. So the one thing to note though is that you can press the ability key again and it will either do more damage or it'll heal more. So it'll heal 70% in a kind of an orb, like a beacon orb basically. And then this is different from the 20% it will normally do. But this is over 5 seconds. So what you can, if you're really good with this ability, you basically wait for it to pass through an ally, and then you're going to press the ability key again to get even more healing on them. It's a hard one to master, and this is kind of like the upper ceiling of this build, is being able to utilize this one ability correctly. So like I said, go into an open area, wherever it may be, and just practice the muscle memory of this move. So you're gonna do it, and when it comes back, you want to press the ability key. Maybe take note of like, I don't know, like a bush or something, and treat it as a player, and try to make that orb explode like right after it gets to that player, so that it will heal them on the initial way coming back, and it'll also heal them again from the explosion. And yeah, that is the bare bones description of that ability, and using it in practice will be something that takes time. So what you can actually do is use this, and when it comes back, switch back to your Void Gauntlet. So you see the capabilities kind of open up once you realize you can swap weapons after using Orb of Decay and then switch back to make it explode. Yeah, so it looks like Sacred Ground you don't have quite enough time for. But with something like Orb of Protection, if you pop that down during the Orb of Decay period, then you also have enough time. So I'll do it here actually.
So you can get that orb of decay to explode on the way back while still having time to give out an orb of protection. So yeah, there is probably a lot to digest there, so I'll stop now before I get too far into it. And now let's kind of go over how to approach as a healer. Alright, so typically when you're playing healer, you're not going to be going in first. You're going to be waiting for the tank to go in. And when the tank goes in, you're not just going to spam a Sacred Ground down immediately. You're going to want to wait for that tank to group the mobs in a relatively grouped place, and then put the Sacred Ground down. So it's maybe like 3 to 10 seconds of time before you're going to put that Sacred Ground down. I'll put a video up right now of some gameplay of that, but it's basically a waiting period until the tank is situated, and then you're going to put it down. The reasoning behind it is you want to maximize the amount of healing time that Sacred Ground is available for. So if you just put it down immediately, you're not going to get any healing because no one's really going to be taking damage just yet. So in order to maximize that healing output, you want to just wait a little bit of time before putting that down. Another reason is you don't want to take aggro, because if you use a life staff ability, mobs will tend to aggro onto you, so that is another reason to wait. So once you've done that, then there's a few things you can do. So if someone needs health, then typically I'll just use a orb of protection on them. If someone's like below 50% health and they're maybe like off killing another mob, then I'll use Divine Embrace on them. And then it's just a back and forth between Orb of Protection and Divine Embrace until your Sacred Ground is available and off cooldown. Then you're going to put that back down on the tank, or maybe like 2 or 3 DPS who are killing a separate clump of mobs. But typically you're going to be putting it on the tank. And then again, just back and forth with Divine Embrace and Orb of Protection. And if you need health, you can dodge and heal. Or if you need mana, you can use a mana pot. And it's just a back and forth with that. Now this only covers the life staff. So when you're first starting, I would just try to not necessarily master the life staff, but get a really good feel for it. And really try to understand this build and how it functions. And then start mixing in the Void Gauntlet. The first step that you want to do as a healer is using Oblivion. This should be the go-to ability that you use whenever you swap to the Void Gauntlet, especially if you're close range with your DPS and tank. Then just put that down. It'll increase damage and give stamina to the tank and also the DPS. So once you've done that, then you can start, utilizing Orbit Decays and Void Gauntlets. Like I was saying, Void Gauntlet is going to be your move that you use to reduce cooldowns. So the reasoning, or I guess the times where you would use Void Gauntlet would be when you know that there's healthy teammates and you don't really need a heal right now, and you also most likely already have a Sacred Ground down. I typically won't use Void Gauntlet unless I have a Sacred Ground already down, because especially in higher mutations, without a Sacred Ground, it's really risky to just switch to a Void Gauntlet and go into DPS mode, I guess. Another good reason for using Void Gauntlet is the healing aura that you will get from Void Caller. So it'll give a 30% healing radius around you and heal friendlies within that area. And it's just super useful to be able to have healing from Orb of Decay and Void Gauntlet. If you hit enemies and get 5 stacks of that, it'll start putting a healing aura around you. And that is the basic flowchart for the Void Gauntlet. Using them in tandem is kind of the hard part, but again, it's just kind of getting a feel for when to use certain abilities, when not to use certain abilities. But the big takeaway is you always want to use Oblivion, because Oblivion is a very strong move and it'll help your whole team. And also, Orb of Decay is kind of like that upper ceiling of skill. Once you start mastering everything else, then you want to start getting into utilizing that Orb of Decay a little bit better. And then Void Gauntlet, just kind of practice with that. Get a feel for it and understand when you should and shouldn't use it. Alright, so I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover with this video. I encourage you, if you are interested in some more healing, to check out the recently posted Tempest healer video that I did. That's where I took the clips for this video, is from that run. It was just with randoms, so don't expect anything crazy. It also wasn't mutated, it was just regular. But it will kind of give you a rough idea of my my general playstyle with this build. And yeah, that is about it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later.